Hi, you guys. So I'm coming back to you with the second part in our series on power, exchange of power, but specifically looking into cognitive liberation. Today we're going to be discussing exchange power. Last time we discussed coercive power. Let's get into it. Exchange power arises from behaviors and structures that use the force of mutual gain. You do this for me or us, and I or we will do this for you. Going to a grocery store and exchanging money for bread, milk, and broccoli is one example. No threats are made, no bribes, no gifts are freely given. The force behind exchange power relies on trust and the belief that the exchanged is balanced and fair. Under ideal situations, where neither party suffers a resource disadvantage, exchange power often produces mutual benefit. However, exchange is not always conducted on equal terms. Possession of property for one party and the absence of resources for another party may create a significant disparity. Where inequalities are great, the system of exchange power evolves into domination relations that look a lot more like coercive power. Do this or you'll starve to death. You won't get to feed your children, etc. When we look at debt bondage, sharecropping, sweatshops, those are all examples where there is an imbalance of resources to make the trade and exchange between the workers and the owners, and it is a basis for exploitation. Exchange power where resource disparities are great morphs into domination structures. And remember, our whole series is on domination and submission, so that we can work toward an exchange of power, a power exchange between us and the status quo. Think about this. When American revolutionaries defined the tea tax as unjust in 1773, you know the slogan, no taxation without representation? It was no longer seen as a basis for mutual benefit. Instead, a new belief stressed how unjust taxes reflected imperial domination of the British Crown over the American colonies. The dumping of tea in Boston Harbor expressed this new belief. Revolution was just around the corner as the colonists created a new kind of power that would eventually give rise to a new nation. We're talking about cognitive liberation. The exchange, the power exchange, where the submissive party overtakes the dominant. It was not the coercive or exchange of power of the American revolutionaries that won against British military force, but power with each other, which is what we want to look at. Integrative power. This is why the British attempt to repeatedly divide the colonies and their emerging constitutional governments didn't work. American revolutionaries, like so many others throughout history, wielded power for a common good, a force that when mobilized challenges even the greatest militaries. We do not need weapons. We cannot fear weapons. We have to engage in cognitive liberation. We talked about that last time. Go back and listen to that again. if you need to. This is also true for India's independence movement and for many more large and small challenges to authority. Consider those waged by las madres de la plaza, the mothers of the plaza, whose defiant challenge to Argentina's military dictatorship in 1977 exposed the government's role in the disappearance of thousands, whose persistence helped usher in a democratic movement for that country. Now, y'all know I don't agree with democracy because it tramples on the freedoms of the minority. But nevertheless, there was an exchange of power founded in cognitive liberation, because the mind is the first battleground, right? I'm going to go ahead and get into integrative power now. Let's just get into that. Integrative power is associated with cooperative force, where people join together toward a common, collectively defined good. The sentiment that motivates integrative power is found in people's shared identification with a moral or cultural objective. We do this because we care about X. This type of power relies on the force of community altruism. Altruism involves devotion to the welfare or good of others. It does not necessarily mean devotion to the welfare of all humanity or all life. It can, for some causes, but usually it is more restricted to some group or common value. Think about that. This sentiment can be found in the sacrifice of a soldier that makes that sacrifice for other soldiers in combat. It was the power created when the African American activists stepped into white-only lunch counters, buses, and bathrooms, revealing the intolerant and violent reaction of coercive power that held up the system of Southern segregation. Although we could argue segregation or desegregation it was not advantageous to us across the board, was it? But nevertheless, it stands as an example. This is the power behind democracy, behind nationalism in its benign and imperial forms. It is the power that people create when they sacrifice personal benefits toward a common defense, toward social justice, or toward a revolution. It is also the force that enables militarily weak but morally and socially integrated guerrilla armies to thwart superior military forces. Think Vietnam War. They were stringing those people up by the guts of their body to trees. Did they have the numbers? Did they have the weapons? No, but they did have integrative power. Integrative power is people power. Now, this does not mean that it's always benign. The Nazis succeeded in fomenting a belligerent nationalism, a passion of the people that merely strengthened the coercive power behind the German fascism. Integrative power generates a horizontal solidarity, ties among people who commit to a common goal, though that goal may not be beneficial to people outside of their group. We see this in fascism. We see this in imperialism. All three forms of power can be used in combination. Let's see this illustrated. Let's take the example of a boycott. Think about what is involved in a successful boycott. At first glance, it appears that only the source of power that is used in a boycott is exchange power. We'll stop buying from you until you do X, right? But beneath this is integrative power. A group of people organized towards shared objectives who collectively agree to act. Act. Economic boycotts have been used to confront many social problems in many different cultures and times. Sometimes it takes more than economic boycotting. Nevertheless, we have seen this done via international sanctions, which pressured the government of South Africa to end apartheid. In dealing with the Iroquois women boycotting lovemaking and childbearing in the 1600s, because they demanded that the men include them in decisions about war and peace. Or even on a small scale, consumer boycotts during the Memphis sanitation workers' strike. Behind those actions were integrative power, and sometimes coercive power. In the same way, coercive power often requires consenting masses, not a majority, but a visible minority. Not a majority, but a visible and vocal minority. Belief and the ability to back the action. That is integrative power. As you can see, social power seems complex, but it is simple in its nature. It involves layers of human organization, beliefs, and actions. Understanding social power will aid our exploration into cognitive liberation and power exchange. First, at an interpersonal level, then at a communal level, then at a national level, and beyond. We're going to be looking into power dynamics in everyday life, in my next upload. You can also look forward to the reading of a book called Natural Selection and the Race Problem by Benjamin K. Hayes. This is an old book, but we're going to learn a lot from it. So be looking out for that. Again, we're going to be looking at power dynamics in everyday life, and we're going to be doing a book reading, Natural Selection and the Race Problem. Because for us to engage in cognitive liberation, we have to recognize the mental hurdles and chains that exist so that we can see the world with new eyes, so that we can interpret our environment through the proper lens, and so that we can engage in an exchange of power that is advantageous to our communal interests. I'd like to thank you guys all for supporting me here. and I look forward to joining you as we look into these topics in greater depth.